Kültür ve Turizm Bakanlığı ve Bilgi Üniversitesi Kültür Politikaları, Yönetimi ve Araştırma Merkezi'nin katkılarıyla gerçekleşen webinar serimize hoş geldiniz. So, as the theater cooperative, we are happy to host our valuable speakers for this event. Doçent Dr. Serhan Ada from İstanbul Bilgi University as the moderator and the host, and the speakers are Professor Dr. Lluis Bonet from University of Barcelona and Mehmet Ergen, Artistic Director of Municipality Theatres in Istanbul and Arcolo Theatre in London. One of the most important goals of the theater cooperative is to improve issues of theater management of our current theaters in Istanbul and also in Turkey. However, this need and work has become much more valuable because of the nature of the times we are living now. More than ever, we need to find innovative ways and solutions to improve our existence and to guarantee our presence for the future. Without doubt, greatest work of art and theater evolved during times of crisis in history. But as cultural institutions and organizations, we have to survive in order to open the path for these breakthroughs in the population and in our creations. All this requires short-term, fast and urgent solutions, but at the same time, long-term, permanent and innovative solutions. This webinar series is part of our quest for such solutions, which will remedy our passing wounds and hopefully make us stronger for the future. And with that note, I leave the virtual ground to Serhan Ada and our speakers, whom I would like to thank immensely on behalf of the Theatre Cooperative for taking part in this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yeşim Soy, and I would like to thank the Theatre Cooperative for giving us this unique opportunity to talk about theater with uppercase T, because I think that more and more we'll talk about theater, as we did in the past. I will introduce you my two distinguished guests for today, but let me start by hailing our friend Ali Cem Köroğlu from the State Theatres, who lost his life while working for theater to COVID at an early age. And it's a serious and really an important loss for all of us. And he was working for the State Theatres, which also reconfirms that we have to be very diligent on the measures to be taken. Well, Professor Lluis Bonet is a colleague, and he is joining us from Barcelona today, and probably out of a class. He is a professor of applied economics at the University of Barcelona, and his specialization is for cultural economics, cultural policy, and arts management. He is also the director of the Cultural Management Graduate Program, including a PhD program, 2 MAs, research centers, and lifelong learning. And he used to teach at MIT in Montpellier in France and several other universities, including Istanbul Bilgi University, MA program in the past. And he has recently, also I have to add that he has a book translated to Turkish, The End of National Cultural Policies by Istanbul Bilgi University Publications. And recently he has published and co-authored and co-edited 2 important books, and we'll talk about them. One is Theater Management. Yes, there is such a thing. And it is called Theater Management Models and Strategies for Cultural Venues. And the second is also very important, although it doesn't look so. It's called Breaking the Fourth Wall, Proactive Audiences in the Performing Arts. The book, and he is also part of Creative Europe projects, namely Be Spectative and Stranger Peripheries. The book Theater Management has been co-edited and written by Hector Shargorotsky. I think he is from Argentina. So I think that that book is also giving us an insight not only to European experiences also theory, but also to the South America, where there is a lively performing arts scene. Our second guest today is Mehmet Ergen, who is also a colleague, I may call, because he used to teach at our performing arts department at Istanbul Bilgi University. He is the founder and the artistic director of very important theater in London, Arcola, and which is in a difficult and culturally diverse neighborhood of Hackney, Dalston, to be more precise, and which is doing a lot of novelties now with the post-COVID situation. And then he co-founded or founded the Talimhane Theater in Istanbul, which used to be also a periphery when Mehmet and his team founded that place, which now is becoming very rapidly gentrified. And since less than a year, may I say, he is the General Artistic Director of Istanbul Municipality Theaters, having, I think, 13 stages, if I'm not mistaken. So it is also a big responsibility. Let me start with Lluis and his book on theater management. Your book on theater management is worth to be published in Turkish. So I would suggest to all our participants to think how we can find a way, maybe co-edit it and re-edit it, adding some thing from Turkey, and it would be very useful for not only the, let's say, partners and associates of the theater cooperative, but to the theater community at large. In your theater management book, you mention in a chapter called resources, you mention about human resources, which is quite obvious, but you also mention about financial resources and costs. So while giving an insight to the resources, of course, there is the ticket revenues, but there is several approaches to the pricing for tickets, shows, and other activities. But there is also public funding. We are okay on that, but there are image rights, sponsorship and patronage, rentals, and other cultural activities, and so on. So let us start with this issue, which is
O yüzden de haydi bu konudan bahsedelim biraz. Bu gerçekten de
community in Turkey. What are the resources? How can we deal with that, etc.?
So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this seminar. So it's a pleasure to be virtually in Istanbul. I think next time I hope I will be able to walk again in the Galata Tower area and as well in the different theaters in this very vital part of the city. But well, from the moment it's not possible. So I'm at home like most of you. So, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to the theater. I was just sharing with my colleagues that in Barcelona, this is still possible with a lot of security measures, but I was in the theater last Saturday. So, because it is important as well to be close to our colleagues, as an audience, in my case, as an audience, because I think it's important in this very difficult moment to demonstrate that we have a commitment with the theater sector and have a commitment with the professionals that are suffering so much at this very moment. So going to the question that Serhan was asking me, well, it's clear that without resources, we can do performances. How we get these resources? Well, that depends a lot on the ecosystem. So when I was preparing this talk, I was just reading material from different countries in Europe. And what I see is that in most in the European countries with stronger public policy supporting the performing arts, today most performing art agents are investing most of their time lobbying authorities, public authorities, to get two things: money for maintaining the sector alive, because the problem is that close to 1 year without real activity means that most independent proposals and projects will disappear. And with the disappearance of this activity is a whole field of knowledge, of experience, of energy who will disappear. So there is a lot of lobby in trying to get money for that. But at the same time, lobbying in order to get norms that avoid the most damaging effects. Because one of the damaging effects is audience are changing their cultural habits, and how we maintain this tension, this faithful relationship, because in most performing arts, we need not only money coming from the public sphere, but we need money coming from the audience, the ones who really, through their presence, through buying tickets, through as well some kind of sponsorship, because there are different kinds of sponsorship. There are not only the corporation sponsorship, but also individual people sponsorship. How we can get this action. So in the countries where the sector is strong enough because have good policy support, people are investing time on lobbying public authorities, and at the same time developing all kinds of strategies to get closer to their traditional audiences. So this is my first part of the answer. Of course, we can go farther, but I think it's important.
Sure. Go on.
I think Louis mentioned that this is the answer to the first question. And
first part of I thought there was a second part after lobbying. Okay.
No. Of course, it's true that I was thinking about that lobbying as an activity and trying to obtain that. And of course, the other issue is how to maintain. In most European countries, we get the possibility to, because the European Central Bank is allowing us free credits, and some as well, some direct grants in order to maintain the activity. And there are different systems. One system is that the government is paying the salaries of a percentage of the salaries of the people, and that allows to maintain this activity, even though we are not receiving own income. Okay, the issue of that is that that will finish in some moment, and we are not sure if, because part of this money is credit, other part is grant. The grant is clear. The problem is the debt, and the big challenge is it will be possible to return this debt, these credits, and that's something that works in maybe normal economic sectors, stronger with the stronger enterprises, but in the performing arts, that always we are in very difficult and very unstable situation. It's not as easy. So these credits comes from banks. The banks get the guarantee loan from the government, but it's not easy to see what will happen. So it is a little bit a potential danger, even though it's maintaining the capacity of having the people of most of the people in this standing up situation. So the issue here is every country is trying to find solutions. Solutions are not always thought thinking on the particular case of the performing arts. And we will see the results and the long-term impact of that.
Thank you very much. It's good that you mentioned about the strong public policy cases, because there are weak or not so strong public policy cases, like maybe ours. But also, it's good that you mentioned about the sort of a floating break-even for theaters. I mean, you are up and down to the break-even. So it has to be analyzed. As you mentioned about lobbying and different type of resources, I think Mehmet is well positioned to give us also an insight on what you said, but also practices like pay what you want. That was also, I think, used and practiced by Arcola, or maybe still, istediğin kadar öde, which is a practice we owe to the street theater practically. So, Mehmet, floor is yours.
Hello again. Yeah, I've started to pay what you like about 30 years ago with another theatre I founded in London, Southwark Playhouse, and then it was picked up by a number of theatres. So it's our busiest night, and what it showed was that audiences came to see a play and they paid like £3 instead of 20, 25, but they bought 5 beers that night. So bar makes record sales that night. So that even in London, people seem to value more their alcoholic drinks than ticket prices. I've been in quite a sort of different variety of theatres. I guess there are many ways of making theatre, whether it's community theatre, amateur theatre, experimental theatre, repertoire theatre, commercial theatre, and each of these theatres need a different set of funding. In the upper west of the theatre spectrum with London and New York, all the commercial musicals and big classics and plays with Netflix stars don't get any funding at all, zero. They're not subsidized by the government. They're there to make money. So they do not have to adhere to any of the regulations. They don't have to have a disabled access if it's an old theater. They don't have to cast colorblind. They don't have to care for the community. They do not have to emphasize new writing. They don't have to address the political issues.
But are they still entitled to apply for grants?
They're not.
They're not.
They're not.
This is important. Yeah. Okay. Good.
That's the big problem in Turkey, I find, because in London there are 50,000 actors. We have, I think, less than 5,000. Therefore, making theatre in that kind of capacity blurs the boundaries between what kind of theatres you're making. You could have an alternative space and call yourself an alternative theatre and present a play by a Tony Award-winning playwright or Pulitzer. Does that make you alternative? Yeah. Alternative to what? Because we're all trying to get the rights to the same famous writers who have plays in New York or London. So in that respect, I think Turkey has problems with identifying what kind of theatres need to be funded in what way. And the situation of theatre is not great in Turkey, and we need funding. So the right questions to be asked is who are you performing to? What are you performing? What kind of outcome you're expecting? Are you visiting areas where there are no theatres? Are you doing any workshops? Are you increasing awareness of drama? Are you doing any participation work? All of these things in London add to the kind of funding you would get. In Turkey, we seem to be just pleased to have a building open and have a performance, and we expect government to pay for this, regardless of what the show is. So the major missing point in Turkish theater is that we do not have the kind of bureaucrats in municipal level or state level or arts council type levels, or even in the private sector, to identify what kind of money should be given to what kind of theater. That's the big problem. This is quite advanced in London, because there are a number of questions that is asked. And whilst you're answering those questions, even if you started filling a form because you needed some money, you realize what kind of theater you are by the end of the form. It asks you about who you are. And in Turkey, for example, people would say, well, we're just doing theater and there's not enough arts and we're doing one and pay us. There's a massive imbalance within Istanbul, that there are huge numbers of theaters in some areas and no theater at all in a lot of the other areas, considering some areas of Istanbul have larger population than at least 50 of our cities in Turkey. You'll have an area with 1 million that is larger than most of your Eastern or Central or Mediterranean Turkish cities. So the question here is really starting on both levels. Theater needs to know what its aims are. And sometimes everywhere around the world, actors are so desperate to be on stage, it doesn't really matter. It could be a community theater.
Yani bir topluluk tiyatrosu olabilirsiniz, gezici tiyatro olabilirsiniz, yabancı bir oyun.
It could be performing in the national theater level. It could have music or not. In London, for example, any job will do for at least 20,000 actors. They'll just have it. It's not their policy. It's not like what they graduated to. They didn't go to drama school to tour schools with Shakespeare, but they end up doing it because they want to live. But Turkish actors are a lot more selective because they already have an idea of what they want to do, which includes television, cinema, festivals, theater in nice places, and potentially being a guest star at the National. You can do all of them in your career in Turkey, pretty much. So this is like a general view, regardless of the pandemic. So when this COVID-19 business started, we've had more conversations between Ministry of Culture and the greater municipals and artists, and more cooperatives and more discussions over Zoom than we've ever got together. And this showed both sides were not so prepared for these meetings, particularly the authorities who just give a one-off grant, the state, at the beginning of the year to a one production. You choose a play, you say, I want money for this, you get some money, enough to just make a set or do maybe 3-4 performances, and then you're on your own. So you have to be in some way commercial to make that money to keep running that show. There is no provision for a government to ask a theater company, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And unfortunately, there aren't enough theaters in Turkey to answer that question either. They don't know where they see themselves in 5 years' time. And this also comes from the fact that actors, directors, designers don't know the answers either. I, in my past year at the Municipal Theatre, interviewed many directors who would now even name plays for the next few years. So I think there's a bit of a balance to be addressed. Identifying who you are and seeking funding. So we talked about, I mentioned state funding and municipal funding, but the way it worked over the years, when we say, for example, how England did, it changed hugely from 1970s to today. It became more American. And Turkish theater stayed quite Soviet in terms of how it's funded. For example, Istanbul Municipal Theatre cannot co-produce or cooperate with another funded body. It's just not legal, because we have a parliament, local parliament. It makes decisions. It decides what writers should get, what should actors get, and how sets and costumes are made, how you tour, how much you get as a pocket money per diems on your tour. I cannot sit down with a Spanish theater or an English theater saying, let's do a show and share the funds half and half. It's so rigid that I cannot receive money from another country. I cannot even receive money from another regional theater in Turkey. It just doesn't allow you to do that. Neither it allows to give another company any funding. So instead of sharing a production, for example, let's say with the local Bursa or Edirne theater, which costs 100 and we go 50-50, we can't do that. We both have to spend 100 each. We're rich. We're just too rich for any European country. We also have nearly 400 actors. We have around 1,000 people on a payroll in the municipal theater. Istanbul Municipal Theater is the biggest theater in the world. I've directed in many places, Israel, Canada, America. I've never seen anything like this. I don't know any that exists. That's the way it is. So it's quite an extreme situation for me. The London model, as I said, it was like this in the 70s. You had regional theaters, rep theaters. Most of them were weekly reps, which meant they did a play every week with the same cast. You belonged to Liverpool Playhouse, you belonged to Manchester Royal Exchange. You were part of that ensemble. Ensemble is now completely scrapped. British theatre does not have ensemble. It has 10 people in the office, and we try to find money for a whole season. So where do we find the money in England? This is roughly how it's divided. For example, the Arcola Theatre receives only 25% of what it needs for a whole year from the Ministry of Culture. We make 50% from our box office, and another 25% we have to find from other things, such as selling things, books, bar, and also private enterprises. And the productions separately funded. So this is like running costs of a whole building. Each production has to be funded in a different way. Every play has a partner, another theater maybe, another region, another city, another country, another festival, another private enterprise, another person. That's how things are budgeted. You budget for a production, you decide that it's costing a certain amount of money, and then you need to find that money. And the kind of people you go to, we don't have so much time for me to elaborate on this, but the kind of people we go to depends on the kind of play we choose. And sometimes you can do the other way around. You can say, let's choose this kind of play that will get some kind of funding from this area. I need to say that Arcola, with its funding, produces about 25 productions a year with 20 people in the office. Municipal Theatre produces about 10 plays a year with 800 in the office.
In Istanbul, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many photographers do you have in the payroll?
Photographers?
Yeah.
0.
No photographer.
Photographer comes for the production photos, spends 2 hours, shoots really good photos and leaves. And we just give them one set of money. Okay, each production has a different designer, different director, different actors, different photographers. There is no ensemble. We don't do ensembles. This is a very commercial model being adapted after Margaret Thatcher, who Americanized Britain with Ronald Reagan and created the Arts Council and got rid of the whole bohemia that actors and directors meet in certain cafes in a central Parisian environment and distributed them over the country. So you actually gone somewhere else, which is a system that should work for Istanbul. I'm not Thatcherite in any way, but I think there's a 90% of the artists being in Istanbul does no favors to Turkey. They should be paid to go to another city to work. Which national theater does that? So much to say. I don't know how much more I should add.
Okay, thank you. Just to link what you said with what I just wanted to ask to Lluis, as these sessions are also supposed to be recorded and maybe some suggestions to be kept, I would like to remind one thing that while talking about credit lines, Lluis mentioned about banks. So this reminds me that in our, let's say, financial cultural scene, we have almost all the banks having their own cultural activity. Publishing houses, galleries, cultural foundations, and so on. Even, I think only one of them has a sort of a specific department for contemporary visual arts collectors. Because it's booming, because it's billions and so on. Maybe we can also have a different type of lobbying with the help of the Theatre Cooperative and other cooperatives around Turkey and theaters, that they should start having specific credit lines, at least with the culture sector. So from where Mehmet has left, because he has formulated important questions, what are you intending to perform, for whom, and so on? I just want to come to the issue of the so-called audiences, but I would call it rather citizen engagement, because it is more about participation. So whatever you call it, I mean, co-creation, prosumer, audience empowerment, or active spectator, how a theater would deal with this different type of stakeholders?
Well, just before answering this specific question, I want just to react to some things that Mehmet said, because when he was explaining the situation of Istanbul, in a way, it's quite similar to what is happening in Argentina or in other South American countries, where there is a huge national theater, which a very big budget, with most of this budget coming from the government, and with most of the professionals in the sector, their only wish is to get a salary from this place, because there is or this national theater or the desert. Not the desert, because there are a very strong independent theater, and there is as well a commercial theater. But in a way, and that is, I want to connect everything. It is important to understand the ecosystem. So it's not easy to change an ecosystem, and there are a lot of reactions again changing it, because people are used to the ecosystem. So people dreams about foreign models, but it's not as easy to adapt to an ecosystem, because the ecosystem had all over the years creates relationships. So I think it's important to think about an evolution. So how we goes from what we are now to another system which slowly allows all the professionals and institutions to adapt to the new framework. So that's very important, because there are theaters that are just mainly focused on performing, but most of the independent sector shares performing plus co-production plus training plus community projects, because the sources of the resources comes from different places. Audiences mainly pays for tickets, or some people for training activities. Governments or private foundations pays for the community projects or the performances, and that's why we need to understand how we organize it. And it's important to have in mind that an ecosystem means that a national theater is taking advantages of the system, but at the same time is giving synergies. So how this works and the relationship between the audiovisual sector, the performance art sector, the training, the etc. So that is really important. So going now to your specific question about citizen engagement. Why this is so important now? It was important before the pandemic, but it is even more important now because the sector needs to re-energize the circuit, the relationship between audiences and the performing arts. And this is very important because during this very long period of time, many people stop going to theater because it's a threat, because it's not possible, because etc. for many reasons. That depends on the situation in each country and the regulation depending on the moment of the pandemic. But it's clear that we cut most of our habits of going to theaters. So we need to rebuild this relationship. So empowering audiences is a way to create communities that allows us. Of course, that we need to do that in a very flexible way because not everyone wants to be involved in this kind of engaging our audiences. Because I only want, for instance, to go to a theater, sit down in my seat, see a performance, and go back home. And other people will like, but it's important to develop strategies in order to create communities. And communities means, for one side, faithful people who are coming back. They tell to their friends. It is easier to develop a sponsorship or a mecenat kind of strategy with them. You can do things, and at the same time, you can develop in parallel training and other activities that will get money back to your own project. So I think this is very, very important. Of course, it's also because we are including theater in a more social impact kind of a strategy. And this is important because the isolation of the sector, it is a potential danger. So we are poor people trying to survive. The society don't believe on us. So we have to change the mentality. We have to be part of the society, changing with them and provoking and associating with them in their what they worry about their own proposals and ideas. So that's why it's so important to develop all kinds of engaging citizens with us. So I tried a little bit to mix both things, but I think it was interesting to do it.
Absolutely. And I think Arcola, since the beginning, had this impact thing in mind, not only through their spectators and audiences, but also with the very structure, actors, decision-making of the theater. So how would you respond to that, Mehmet?
I think choices begin right from the day one. You open a theater, and where you open that theater is already what your policy is. So as you mentioned before, Dalston is an area where there are 74 languages are spoken. It's a very poor area. It has a very transitional workforce area, from Jewish to Kurdish to Nigerian to separate. It's been generations of people making money and going to live in the so-called better places. And I've opened theaters in factory floors, usually, and ateliers, so people knew what they were coming to. When I opened Arcola, the seating was from a closed down Indian restaurant. So there were benches smelling of curry, and lights were just what we found. We just went to every theater and picked up a light or a speaker or something. So when you're already saying, this is the kind of theater I am, and I'll develop from here, with zero funding, with nothing, paying actors, nobody, anything, just living very poorly, and living in the building with a bunch of actors. And in 2 years' time, you start getting some funding because it is recognized by all sorts of funding bodies. Who funds you? First, the audience. The audience thinks you should be there, so they come and see your plays. The local government sees that you should be there, and then the state and the Ministry of Culture and local businesses come and see. That's how you prove that point. You are owned by that community. It's quite strange that I open theaters in Istanbul and I leave the building and I go next door and the guy asks me, what do I do? I said, I'm next door. I'm the theater. I'm running the theater next door. Whereas when I'm in London, the restaurants, cafes, everyone knows who I am. They're not particularly different people. It's not like some dream that even every waiter goes to see the plays. It's not like that, but they're aware of what you bring to that area. They see the audience. They see the both financial and cultural addition you make to that area. So what we seem to, my observation is that we ghettoize certain places like Taksim and Kadıköy and Moda, and we say we're a group of people, we're just going to generate this area through arts and culture. Nobody chooses to go to another area. So that was my solution. I didn't go to London and set up a theater in Soho. I set it up in Dalston. And there's a Financial Times review for me about 10 years ago. It says, director Mehmet should be watched because wherever he goes, the house prices go up. Because that's what arts and culture does.
Gentrifying agent.
Yeah. And like Arter is doing it to Dolapdere, like Bilgi did it to Dolapdere before. Good universities, good art galleries, good theaters, the house prices go up. But you could make those places quite trendy. So that was a challenge, I guess. And artists come to places, they make them nicer, house prices go up, artists leave, and you go and find somewhere else. I've done that about 5 or 6 times in London. But I think the important part here is really, there are some ridiculous questions in the Arts Council, like now that the interpretation department will have difficulty, I think, but what is the aim of your theater and what is your objective for the theater? Aims and objectives and targets and target audiences. It's like you think you're repeating yourself with these questions, but it really defines who you are. For most, I won't give names, but many theaters were quite late during the pandemic to ask for money. There was a lot of conversation about municipal governments, local governments, and cooperatives, and a number of different cooperatives asking for help. But in London, it worked the other way around. For example, the Arcola closed before Boris Johnson said theaters are closing. And within about 3 hours, we had £75,000 already paid by the audience because we asked for it. Asking for money from individuals, from your theater audience, seems to be very slow in this country. The subject came up before, but it's a culture that we don't know where to give and we don't know who to ask from. This is a massive department. If I was to advertise for development officer for a private theater, where do I go? Hürriyet İnsan Kaynakları. It's like, where do I advertise on Instagram? Do I say, I need a person who will take my theater and take it on a corporate level, and I will reach 500,000 ticket sales? Is there a person who does that for me, apart from your students? So how that becomes and how that becomes. How many theaters can clearly identify themselves as, this is where I am, this is how many tickets I want to sell, or do we see this as not so much as a business, but talk about it as, I'm an artist and I don't know where I will be in 5 years' time, depends how I feel. That doesn't generate any development idea. As an arts organization, you need to grow. all arts organizations grow into something else. At least you could be in the same building, you could have the same amount of people, but you can earn money. There's a way. I mean, everybody does it. So who guides us to do this? It's not the government, because they don't know how to guide you, because they don't know the difference between a commercial theater who performs in a very chic environment and in a basement in a poor area. They don't know the choices of plays. They're not aware if your play is dealing with women's issues, if it's a young and living writer who needs to be supported. Is there a commission process for that writer to sustain himself, herself? They don't know. They just look at it like theater needs money, and they don't know how to give and who to give. So since we don't have enough bureaucrats in Turkey to be able to tell us how they're going to distribute the money, we need to tell them how money should be distributed and what should be cared for. Like going to areas where there are no theaters, supporting writers who've never been paid in their lives, supporting actors who have a certain tax records that they really are actors and they're not making enough money. How many performances one should do, and how many people do we reach? We don't have to reach thousands, but maybe not hundreds either. So I think the guidelines, I've never seen a guideline myself living in this country. And during the pandemic, I haven't seen a clear description from the local government or national government saying, this is what we're offering. They usually have meetings asking artists, what do you want? And artists usually say money, and they try to give it. But this just happens in a good meeting. But what happens for the next meeting? What happens for the next 2 years, 3 years? How do we sustain these theaters?
May I have a very quick intermediary question to you? As you mentioned, for the, let's say, breakdown of the revenues of Alcola, if it's not confidential, how about the municipal theater? Is it 100% the municipality or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so the answer is quite easy, huh?
Yeah. The problem with the municipal theater, once you become an actor with the status of a civil servant, by law, get paid until you're 65 years old, and law protects you to be in the company as member of an ensemble. You get paid every month. You don't have to work, really. Nobody can force you. And there's also actors under contract, but they're also pretty much in the building, not guaranteed. But it should have a more flexible way of working with the city. We have to make a board meeting to decide if we can have a certain director or designer or extra actor to work for that particular show, and how much it would cost. You know, this just because the theater doesn't have a budget. Theater always has to ask for more money in a board meeting, which will ask for the money from the higher departments.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have it, it will outsource to another company. And the ideal should be artistic directors are told how much money they have and what they're supposed to do with that money. If they can't deliver, then the artistic director has to change.
Yeah. Lluis, you immediately, right after the COVID has exploded, you started to publish your reflections and very mindful thoughts on what's going on and what would be the perspective, let's say, performing arts and culture. And because we have to keep in mind that we have seen that things have suddenly stopped and completely. And they could have stopped in a way we couldn't even imagine. I mean, we couldn't, if we sat one day and talked, do you think that if one day things have stopped, we would never thought of this? So I think there are initiatives trying to cope with the situation, because on the one hand, we have something that we cannot get rid of now is digital. But on the other hand, people are looking for different solutions, for different ways of meeting with their spectators, audiences, and so on. I think On the Move, Circo Strada, and etc., they are trying to make some initiatives. And as you qualified it, there is a total disorientation, discoordination, and a lack of strategic vision. But how could we cope through our, let's say, performing arts environment?
Well, I think that it's true that many agents, especially in the first month, I think most of us, we were totally disoriented. Nobody experimented this situation before. It's not historical experience. But I must say that some people were smart enough to develop very interesting strategies. And I think it's important to say this because we can learn from these people who were more open-minded or more understanding the context and trying to do their best. Because and other people not. I must say that there were many people who were only thinking about where is my money? I have the right to receive money. So that was the kind of reaction of many players. But for instance, the municipality of Barcelona at this very moment have a very bright and intelligent person in charge of the cultural department. He used to be professor of political science in the Autonomous University of Barcelona, so a person who a very strong academic background. And it's quite interesting to see some of the things he did in this period, because I think we can learn. So he knows that the structure of the municipal budget is not easy to move, because there are most of the expenditures are structural expenditures, and the effects of a change is a very strong, have a very strong impact, and a lot of reactions against that. So he tries to use the available money in order to do things which were really needed. Some examples. The first example was the Greek festival. So every summer in July, Barcelona organized this huge international festival. The city of Barcelona, oh my God, it's like the telephone calling. Well, so the city of Barcelona is organizing. I will try to, because I don't know how to stop, because this is the fixed telephone and not. Oh, sorry. Wait a second. I'm just doing something.
A radical move. Okay.
How to stop this fixed telephone? I'm just using my. Okay, now. So this festival is the city of Barcelona only organized 2 festivals with organized by the municipality. Barcelona has around 150 festivals all over the year, most of them organized by the civil society, not by the administration. But this one, it is organized by the municipality, and they move the 3 million euros that they have to invest for this festival was reimbursed in co-production with the performing arts companies and venues in the city in order to present activities not only in July, but as well in the following month. So that was possible to do co-production. Why co-production? Because co-production allows to get money from other sides, not just buying. Another thing they did was every year they give the City Awards. The City Awards is a very prestigious event, have, I don't know, 80 years old. And they decided that this year we won't have City Awards. All the money of the City Awards and all the organization money, because it's quite expensive to organize, it is transformed to small grants to individual people who are not working at this very moment. And these people needs maybe only not a big amount of money, but enough for surviving. So that is direct money to them. And it was very symbolic that the city awards now this year are for individual artists and creators, because these are a small amount of money divided, and they are giving 600 grants. So it's not bad. So that means that you can do things. You can do things if you have a clear idea of what is needed now, short term, and what is needed in the medium term. So you have to have different strategies in order to be able. And it's important to have symbolic messages as well as real resources in order to not just react to the pressure of today's pressure, but to more long-term strategic plan. So I think that's these are some examples. I can explain others, but I think it's quite useful.
Lluis, can you also very briefly tell us about this advisory cultural policy council in Barcelona? Because now Istanbul is looking for such a scheme, probably at a different level, but it would be nice to hear it from you very briefly.
Well, there is an advisory board at the city level, and there is an advisory board at the national Catalan level. So we
are much more interested with Barcelona, the city.
Perfect. So the city, the most interesting thing here is that the people that are part of this advisory board are not the establishment people, but they are selected in representation of new or different ways of understanding, because there are not people, and this is a little bit the difference between the Arts Council of Catalonia and the Arts Council of Barcelona. This is a big difference. In the Arts Council of Catalonia, the board is very well-known people. In the case of the Barcelona, it is not very well-known people coming from the margins of the cultural sector. And of course, why they did that? Because the establishment has their own ways to be present in the general, or close to the city power. So I must say that from the members of this board, I only know one or two. I don't know the others. And the process of selection had been, the idea was, we are looking for young people, people coming from immigrant communities, people coming from, and these people have to rethink and be close to the civil servants in order to tell them from a very outside perspective why we need to do things in this way. There had been quite a controversial debate on that, because the cultural sector was not very happy on this.
Fortunately enough, I might say, the usual suspects are not there, which is good. Okay, Mehmet, you are the person to ask for post-COVID, because first I would start with Arcola. You have launched something which is really for it. I mean, I'm definitely enthusiastic. It is outside Arcola, because one day we would need the outside. I mean, we cannot survive indefinitely with the digital. Mm-hmm. And also, I would like to stress on another point, which is that we used to, especially us, let's say the academics, we used to emphasize the economic and social impact of culture and so on. This was our vocabulary, jargon, whatever. And I think personally that post-COVID, we would need to talk about first the hygienic aspect, impact, and then the ecological footprint, which is also important digitally and also, let's say, physically. And you created also energy-wise lots of innovation with Arcola. So I think it is worth to be mentioned. And additionally, not only you have supplied your venues to the, let's say, private and or independent theaters in Istanbul, but you baptized your new season as minimal. Can we develop a little bit on that and try to see what is our gray horizon with the post-COVID?
Okay, so we've had a space in the same area in the Arcola that we meant to build as a 400-seat theater. And when the corona happened, our current building is an old factory. It's like a maze. It's got basements, it's got bars, toilets all over the place, and it wasn't very good for air circulation. And we're quite an organic building. We've made our entire building from recycled material. When London Olympics finished, we took all the materials from there to build a new theater. And so after Corona, instead of building another theater, we've decided to keep the land and turn that into something called Arcola Outside. It's at the arcolatheater.com. You can see it there. It's designed by John Bowser, which was also the designer of the Olympics. And also the first works he's done was with us. So we've created this theater out of containers with the seating capacity fluctuating between 200 and 100, depending on the corona levels. There are different tiers, different levels in London now. So our productions will start from March, April season with a season called We're Wiser Now. And then into the summer, it will continue. To remind you, we don't have seasons in England. Theatre is open 365 nights, every night, all the time, in every theatre. There's no theatre season opening or closing business. We're open all the time.
Neither in fashion, though. It's gone.
Sorry?
It's gone
Yeah.
also, yeah.
But now that the summer will be the opening of the season. And what was your other question?
Also carbon neutral theater?
We became the first carbon neutral theater. We're sort of on the way to there. We use something called thermometers. We burn old decors and sets, and we make sure that when they're built, we don't have any harmful chemical materials in them, so it doesn't harm the environment. We heat the building with the previous show's set. We also only use LED lighting, so the amount of energy that we use is less than any other theater in Europe. Simple things like when people come to eat in their lunch times, we don't have any plastic forks or single-use water bottles allowed in the building. Everything has to be recycled. Everything has to be organic. Everyone has to wash their thing and reuse it again. Same goes for the chemicals in wardrobe, how we use costumes. So we have a very little impact to harming the environment. In Britain, usually for every £1 you receive from government makes £6 of the theatre. So the amount of, we make records of how many people use the metro and the taxis and how many water bottles they buy and what they drink, what they eat, how we make payments to people who print our tickets. We don't print tickets anymore, by the way. That's changed. You get it through Bluetooth. And we print books still. Set building. The generation of money is huge within the theatre industry. These are the problems that we need to address in our national level theatres in this country. When Taksim was completely deserted with MX Cinema and Atatürk Cultural Center and the Taksim Sahnesi and Muammer Karaca, we're talking about 7,000-8,000 seats. I've made this list of that once. 7,000-8,000 seats every night means 2,000 taxis just hovering around Taksim Square every night. So there's a huge loss of cultural economy there, but they're either not aware or they prefer it. Let's not make money from them, and let's
How
not have them.
about your season minimal?
Season minimal just seems very sensible. We have a huge number of backstage workers along with actors, so passing equipment, carrying decors and building lights, all of that is potential harm to spread COVID-19. We thought we'll have no one on stage. Every play will be one act with a number of actors staying on stage all the time. If they leave the stage, there's nobody else backstage. Sets are minimal. And 5 or 6 plays have 2 casts. So it's a play with 2 actors. One set of actors will do 2 weeks. The other set of actors will do another 2 weeks. So same play stays in the building. And we also reduce number of performances. So we have a show one night and no show the other night, so that disinfection can happen. We'll clean the space, stage and the auditorium. And you know about the seating arrangements already. But I've selected 16 plays. Half of them are new plays, playwrights who are amongst us, and the others are repertory. It was going really well. My observation, I don't know, it's somewhere to share this, but since there are a lot of theater people, state and municipal theaters whose tickets are probably the cheapest in Europe, for like 1 or 2 euros.
50 cents. 50 cents for students and maybe 2 euros.
Sold out every night in the municipal theater, and the big stars in bigger theaters or independent theaters, if the ticket prices went up, they didn't want to risk their lives. But if it was cheap, it was worth seeing the play and be harmed. That's an interesting thing that I found, really. I don't know how long.
Thank you. We have another 10 minutes or so for our talk, and then maybe we can have some questions or comments regarding our session. Lluis, can you a little bit elaborate about your Stranger Peripheries project? Who are the partners? Who are the other stakeholders, and how it goes? Because I think it would be an issue we would all need to deal with right after COVID. I don't want to call it new normal, because normal is gone.
Well, this project is a Creative Europe project, so founded by the European Union. We are a group of theaters, festivals, and 3 universities involved in this project. As the title said, Stronger Peripheries means the peripheries of Europe. The peripheries as well, not only in the geographical sense, but as well the periphery in the sense of people who don't have usually the power. But
Mehmet was just mentioning about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean that in the peripheries there is not good ideas, good cooperation capacity, etc., etc. The other day we had a meeting, and our colleagues from the island of Sardinia, from a theater in Sardinia, were explaining how they were using artificial intelligence to rethink their theater performances. So, and that is coming from a theater in a very poor island in the Mediterranean. These people can be in a periphery, but can be very, very active. So the idea is that we want to generate, not only among us, but through the experience, to share this experience with all other agents in the peripheries of Europe, in order to build alternative systems. So for co-production, alternative systems of knowing the references from other parts. Because what happens in general is that we always look to the same places. We always look to what is happening in London, what is happening in Germany, what is happening in France, while we are not looking to our neighbors who are in parallel with us, that are more or less in the same periphery than us, and we can learn a lot with them. So that is a little bit the strong point of this project. So we are proposing tandems, tandems in the idea of doing things together, a lot of building training activities among us, so learning among us. This is part of the scheme. At the same time, trying to see why the international cooperation done by the states, in which way we can use, in which way it could be a potential danger because there is an instrumentalization. So we want to analyze critically this point, and at the same time being able to help people to look around, breaking the traditional symmetries. That's a little bit the spirit, the philosophy of this project.
Yeah, I think there are some doors opened also for further thought based on that project. Mehmet, how would you see the times to come regarding theater in Turkey and in general?
Do you mean to do with pandemic or?
Yeah, post-pandemic world.
Well, it was quite interesting because Turkish theatre had a huge impact in the last 5 years. We had many writers, many venues opened, and numbers of productions were going up to 300 or so, which was not the case 10 years ago. 20 years ago, it was a lot poorer than this. And there were talks about corporates collaborating with private theatres a lot more. And this COVID, in a way, stopped a lot of that. We'll need to see what the wreckage is afterwards, see how many theatres actually survived. Because unfortunately, the government never had a 3 to 5 year plan for theatres, so it was always trying to save the day. But in a sense, economically, before the corona, theatres were not surviving anyway. People were surviving by their other works, teaching in universities, doing drama classes privately or in other drama schools. They were doing commercial works, and they were trying to support the theatre. Although there's a union, actors union, but there was no base salary for any actor. If you went into a 100-seater or 300-seater theatre, there was no guarantee that you would receive a certain amount of fee after every show. This was not really set up. Actors Union trying to do its best, but it's not really officially happened. You could actually exploit actors. You could actually tell every actor that the rent is so high in this lovely theatre that we cannot pay the actors. Instead, we pay the venue. There are no other avenues opened for actors, like if you have a sort of national tour or anything like that. There's always organizers taking certain parts of the country. And this only happens if you have a famous actor or something. So in a way, post-COVID and pre-COVID, the security, the job security, and the level of comfort theatre makers should have hasn't really changed. We may be less after COVID. I think there needs to be a serious attempt from the funding bodies, whether they're corporate or government or local government, to see what it means to fund a theatre company. In a long term, in a short term, in a one-off project, maybe it's a one educational project, one production, 3-year plan, venue-based theatres, theatres without a venue, community theatres, educational theatres. They need to be classified, and they need to look at their classifications and see, what are we missing? Do we have enough quality children's theatre? Do we have enough youth theatre? Even in the municipal theatre that I started to run, there are no plays for age between 10 and 14. There hasn't been in the past year or two. It's just a very difficult avenue. Could funding bodies target certain things? Could they say, we need theatre companies who do this kind of work in this kind of areas for this kind of money. Now, to be able to say that, they need to be guided by people. I've never been invited to a meeting in I advise the Arts Council in Britain, but I've never been asked to advise the Ministry of Culture in Turkey. So
you can be full of hope right now, because the Higher Education Council in Turkey has decided to give instructions to open 3 more cultural policy departments, MA programs, 2 in Ankara and 1 in Istanbul. So we may be hopeful to the future. We are already into the Q&A session, and Yeşim Özsoy has reminded that, do you each have recommendations for theaters during the time to get over to the pandemic?
Well, a recommendation, a very clear recommendation, is cooperation, and for instance, cooperation between the health sector and the performing arts sector. For instance,
so trans-sectorial cooperation and solidarity, we can call it.
Yeah, but even I think it's for the future. I'm thinking about the post-COVID as well. I don't know, last Saturday there were a very interesting experiment in Barcelona between the Apollo Hall and a hospital, and they were analyzing they were doing tests to the people going to this event, and a same amount of people not going to the event, but there were volunteers in both sides. Both sides had been tested, and that means, in a way, the health service were looking for a big group of young people going to a cultural event, and the venue decided to cooperate, to generate. So it's sending a message to society saying, culture is a safe place. We are committed with the challenges today. We can do things together, but at the same time, we are able to build long-term strategies. So I think that are examples of things that we can do.
Thank you. Mehmet, there is also an extra question about donations, because legally it is complicated in Turkey. How would you see to, let's say, enrich the set of resources for theaters, and what are your recommendations post-COVID?
I think, number of theaters made this. I don't know what the legal, there was no, people phone me and give me account numbers and I just pay them. I didn't ask if it was legal. If I know a theater, there's at least 4 of them. I did this too. I think it takes some work. I don't know if it's illegal. It's not really my department. I'm not really a lawful man, but
there is always a way to...
You can buy tickets to use later. We've done that at the Arcola. We said, most of our tickets sold in advance 2 or 3 weeks ahead at least, and everyone left their tickets. They didn't ask for it back. So that was a big income. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to name theater names, but there's like 3 or 4 quite successful theaters. Maybe they could.
Yeah, last week there was another webinar by the Dutch Culture and then the Kumbaracı 50. So there was this case of crowdfunding as well. So this issue is still hot. So we are ready for questions and comments, the 3 of us. Someone said March could be a good idea, but merchandising, yeah, sure. Yeah. What would you say, Lluis?
Depends of the size. Not always merchandising is a good income strategy. Sometimes it's more a communication strategy than a real income issue. That depends a lot of your size, the size of your audience, and as well the capacity of transforming symbolic to real economic value. And that's something which you have to do carefully. So not just because I do that, I will be rich. So
sure. There is, I think, theaters have been doing through Fongogo, Kickstarter, and the like also to have a variety of resources for funding, which seems to be our sort of darkening our seeing only resources, but I feel that we have to look somewhere else also to audiences, communities, citizen engagement, which also contribute to resources somehow. Mehmet, what would you add to that?
I mean, in terms of merchandise, if that's the only way to make money, you could overprice it, and at the end of the day, you're trying to generate money for the theater. We can't reinvent the wheel, really. I think we need to look to the future. One needs to sit down and say, for the 10 liras that I need every day for this venue, where will each lira will come from? Some from ticket sales, some from some other sales. We don't like being like that. We're not that kind of culture. We're the sort of Eastern European suffering, like musicians of the Titanic. I can't do that. I mean, I remember some Turkish actors coming to Arcola, and I say, can you hold the play scripts and programs? We're selling them for £1. They just cannot do it. Selling is not in the spirit of the theater makers in Turkey, which is quite ironic, because what they do is selling their talents for money. But when it comes to running a theater, they don't want to be in the selling position. I know actors who are so embarrassed to be behind the box office or behind the bar, but it is a culture that you either do it or you don't do it. One has to do it, I think. If you're not relying on local or national governments or a corporate, you'll have to live, or you live cheaply.
Well, any more questions? Because I think that also thinking out of the box, trying to push off the limits of the current legislation, not go against it, but trying to think out of it would also help us. Is there anyone from the theaters? I know that my students can get the answers they want throughout the weekend, the classes. Anyone from the theaters who have a question or any comment regarding the session? Yeşim, as our host, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, about the donation part, I think it's what Mehmet Ergen said, there's a classification problem, because most of the theater, I mean, all of the theaters have commercial status. So it's not possible to get donations with a commercial status. So you have to pay a lot of taxes and, make a lot of, somersaults in order to get the money to be donated. But as Utter Erhard rightly mentioned, recently our theaters are becoming more and more used to asking for donations. And I think it's a culture that we should develop, because it's one of the main things that can happen if there isn't any presence of the state and so forth. But I think overall, one of the most important things that I got from this talk is about this classification need in terms of theaters. And also the aims, what you aim in your theater in terms of your development and your contribution to the society. And thank you for all the speakers to be here and to contribute to our
As we have a few more minutes before we close, I mean, there is a question coming from a theater scholar right from Berlin. So the floor is yours, Özlem.
That would be Çağla Urgancı, or what?
Özlem Can Yürek.
Yeah. Hello, I am trying to unmute me. Probably now I am unmute. You can hear me?
We hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
We can hear.
So, I am I am going to give a very small example from Germany, because we do not have time, but I think it's also quite interesting. quite related to all the things you discussed up until now. I'm a cultural researcher and a lecturer, also a PhD student in Hildesheim University. My focus is also the performing arts, and especially state and municipal theaters. So let me give you this, present this picture. We have enormous amount of funding going to state and municipal theaters. Before the COVID, we had 10.5 billion euro going to culture, and a third of it was going to only the theater landscape. So this was before the pandemic. Now even we have all kind of funding options for public theaters, for independent theaters. We have such a unique system here. We do not only have public theaters, we have private theaters, we have an enormous amount of examples from the independent theater scene. I think we have more than 1,000 independent theater initiatives here. We have around 150 theater festivals. This is a unique system. So my what I would like to say shortly, we have the money. Now we focus on the digitalization of the theater landscape, how this digitalization can help the theater landscape to engage with the audience, but more from the perspective of audience development. So what we are questioning right now, part of the independent theater scene, although we have the money, we cannot reach the 50% of the population. 50% of the German population doesn't go to theater. Although state and municipal theaters almost entirely publicly funded, they don't need the revenue from the ticket sales. They don't need to look for money from other private sources. So this, I really find it the main issue here in Germany, what Serhanada said, this citizen engagement. We are discussing the citizen engagement in terms of how we can lobby all together with the umbrella organizations, with civic society organizations, with networks, small theater networks. How can we initiate a collective movement so that we can really empower the audience, the artists, and the theater system, so we can produce alternative cultural policy perspectives? Because we also have a lot of cultural actors here, but what we don't have is the political will in Germany. So money also does not help to reach the audience. This is the reason why I wanted to talk. Probably what I picture does not really help the colleagues in Turkey, but also I think we need to really concentrate on the substance, the relevance, social relevance of theater and the function. So I just wanted to say this. Maybe we need to...
Thank you very much. Based on what you said, I'm tended to say that almost the public money is something harmful to the health of the theater landscape, let's say.
Absolutely.
We are just done with the timing. I will just ask last sentences to Mehmet or Lluis. If you have anything to add, it was great. And next week, we have also a very interesting session on audiences, community participation. Moderated by Gökçe Dervişoğlu Okan'dan. So last words.
Well, just to thank the invitation. I totally agree that we need to work much more in legitimation, social legitimation, and the way to work on social legitimation of theater, especially with the youngest population and the people who now invest most of their time in digital cultural consumption, is being needed. So going outside our comfortable areas, trying to build through synergies with other sectors, and try to be with the society in the real landscape of society, not to be close in ourselves.
Thank you. Mehmet, Ergen?
I think just particularly for the Turkish theatre scene to make it very clear in writing to ourselves what we want, for what, so that we can answer for our own company as independent companies, and also when questions asked from the people who can help on any level, a friend, a neighbor, a corporate company, a local company, or state or local government, we're clear to say, this is what I need for this. This is what I need for my building, I need for my productions. And a lot of answers came about donations, about you have to pay tax. Yeah, you have to pay tax. If someone gives you 100, I'm happy to give 20 to the government. That's okay. There's this way of thinking about problems, but one can receive funding, one can receive sponsorship, one can receive investment. You can change the name of it. You can involve people in it. We should not sound like we need money. We should sound like we need partners. Those terrible businesses need us to look good.
Thank you. It was great being with you both, and I enjoyed the session. I hope you too. I would like to thank our hosts, the Theatre Cooperative, for letting us have this session, and also all participants who were with us and who assisted and contributed with their questions. I would also like to thank our translators for their wonderful help to make it alive. And bear with us, next week, same hour, we have another webinar. Bye now.
Bye-bye.